And we now hear from Varghese, and she's a Land and Water Officer at the FAO Land and Water Division of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And she'll provide an overview of a series of UN activities on harmonizing actions that have really more or less started with all of these reports going forward. So please, over to you, Varghese.
Thank you, Claudia. Yes, Claudia asked me to discuss this little that has been done, or almost nothing that has been done up to now on the harmonization of these 2 decades. So next slide, please. We're looking obviously of the 2 decades on water action decade and the action on nutrition decade. We noticed that in the 2 SDG, both SDGs 2 and SDG 6, the progress has been completely not satisfactory. So the idea of this presentation, so next slide, is to look at the main recommendation of the report mentioned earlier by Claudia, the 2020 report published by the UN Nutrition Committee, so that's through FAO and IFPRI collaboration. These 3 recommendations that the report mentioned are to implement nutrition-sensitive agricultural water management, and I will come back to this if this is a bit a mouthful and complex concept. Increase the environmental sustainability of diets, and explicitly address social inequity in water nutrition linkage. We need to have the coordination. I mean, that has been clearly mentioned already. And the report also, next slide please, propose a few case studies highlighting the situation mentioned already by Laila. Most of these case studies show that a lot of vulnerable people are torn between buying water for food or buying water for their domestic purposes. And in such situation, it's not that the right to food and the right to water are in conflict. Both are simultaneously violated. And that's why this report argues for this human rights-based approach, also mentioned by Laila earlier. Another 2 very interesting point of this report is the implication, the health implication of animal source foods. In particular for vulnerable people, protein intake through these animal source foods are very important, but at the same time this animal source food can be also bring a lot of health issue in some part of the population. And fishery can be one possible solution or part of the solution at least. And then this nutrition-sensitive irrigation I already mentioned earlier. This is looking in particular in trying to make sure that women are engaged when we are designing irrigation schemes in particular, but also through the engagement of women, we make sure that the crops that are cultivated are actually the most nutrient-dense crops. And this is not always the case. There are some countries where a large part of the irrigated area are actually dedicated to non-nutrient crops. It can be tobacco, quat for a few examples, but those are not nutrient crops. And this is definitely a very high-level policy that should be taken, but this is an important decision for the member states. Now, looking at what happened after this report published in 2021, a project, an FAO project funded by IFAD, has started on nutrition-sensitive agriculture water productivity in 6 countries that you have listed here. And we're trying to look at how to improve the engagement of women and making sure that where most nutrient crops are selected. There's also the WASAG working group on nutrition, and I invite you to go to this session side event at 12:30 that Claudia already mentioned on the WASAG and the prior call for action. There's a number of farmer fields called and that are also done in partnership with IFPRI in particular, CIWI, IFAD, and obviously this is under the hat of UN Nutrition. I'm also speaking here. And finally, I want to mention a high-level event that will happen in May on sustainable food system for healthy diets, a Mediterranean perspective, and this will probably happen in FAO headquarters in Rome. So just little information about that event for the moment, but for you to look out for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Virginie. And we'll now hear from Dr. Inga Jacobs-Mata. She's the country representative South Africa and the regional representative Southern Africa for the International Water Management Institute. And she will speak to the Pretoria Declaration on Water Use in Agriculture and linkages to nutrition. I think no region in the world requires more attention on improving both water and food security and nutrition in Africa. And that's why we really wanted to have a strong presence from the African Union Commission here in the room. And the messages that the Commission put together just very recently in South Africa will be now transmitted by Dr. Inga. Please, over to you, Inga.
Thank you, Claudia, and I'm really pleased to deliver these key messages on behalf of the African Union. We call it the Pretoria Declaration, which was a call to action by a few stakeholders in Southern Africa meeting recently on these topics. So just a little bit about Southern Africa. This is one of the most water and food insecure regions in the world. Water scarcity is a major problem in many parts due to a combination of factors such as climate change, drought, and poor water management practices. This has led to limited access to safe and clean water, which in turn results in widespread malnutrition and diseases caused by contaminated water. In addition, many people in the region lack access to basic sanitation facilities, further exacerbating the problem. Now, in terms of nutrition, Southern Africa faces both undernutrition and overnutrition challenges. Undernutrition is a persistent problem, particularly in rural areas. Limited access to healthcare and education and poor agricultural productivity result in inadequate food intake and limited dietary diversity. Overnutrition, on the other hand, is increasingly becoming a problem as well, particularly in urban areas where unhealthy diets, sedentary lifestyles, and a lack of access to healthy food options contribute to a rise in diet-related chronic diseases such as obesity and diabetes. Now, there's a clear a need in the region for integrated approaches to address both water and nutrition issues. And this includes strategies that promote water conservation, improve water management practices, but also enhance food security through better agricultural practices. The African Union Commission recognizes that access to safe water and proper nutrition are fundamental human rights and key components in achieving sustainable development across the continent. The AUC has prioritized these issues and has made efforts to address them through various programs. Particularly in 2008, the African Union launched the Africa Water Vision 2025, which aims to promote sustainable water management and equitable access to water resources throughout the continent. And this vision recognizes that water is essential for food security, for health, for poverty reduction, and seeks to promote integrated water resource management, but also improve water governance and increase investment in water infrastructure and technology. The African Union has also launched initiatives aimed at improving nutrition and addressing malnutrition in Africa, such as the African Nutrition Strategy, which aims to reduce malnutrition and its associated health and economic impacts by promoting good nutrition practices, improving food security, and strengthening health systems. In addition, the African Union has collaborated with various partners, including the United Nations and other international organizations, to address water and nutrition challenges in Africa. For example, in 2018, the AU, in partnership with the African Development Bank, launched the Africa Investment Forum, which seeks to attract investment in critical sectors, including water and sanitation, agriculture, health, all to promote sustainable development across the continent. The AU recognizes that water and nutrition are critical components in achieving sustainable development in Africa, and has made efforts to address these issues through several other programs with partners. Now, emanating from the Climate Smart Agriculture Regional Policy Dialogue held in Pretoria in March 2023, we, the stakeholders of Southern Africa, or in Southern Africa, recognize the urgent need to address water and nutrition challenges facing our region. We are committed to working together to find sustainable solutions that will ensure access to safe and sufficient water and nutrition for all. We also acknowledge that the region faces significant challenges in terms of water scarcity, growing severity of floods and droughts, unreliable rainfall patterns, and this has led to food insecurity, malnutrition, and poor health outcomes. We recognize that addressing these challenges require a multi-sectoral and integrated approach involving government, civil society, private sector, and communities, and we will work together to promote the following actions. Increase investments in water infrastructure and management, including the development of water harvesting, conservation technologies, and rehabilitation of existing infrastructure. Promote sustainable agricultural practices that promote water conservation. Strengthen nutrition interventions, including the promotion of breastfeeding, diversified and nutritious food systems, and the prevention and treatment of malnutrition. Increase access to safe and clean water for drinking, sanitation, and hygiene, particularly in rural areas and informal settlements. Build the capacity of communities to manage their water resources and to develop sustainable livelihoods. And finally, strengthen regional cooperation and collaboration to address water and nutrition challenges, including knowledge sharing, joint planning, and resource mobilization. Finally, we are committed to monitoring and evaluating our progress towards these actions and to promoting accountability and transparency in our efforts. We call on all stakeholders to join us in this endeavor and to work towards a Southern Africa that is both water and food secure, healthy, and prosperous. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a powerful call for action, and as usually, of course, we then wait for the actual action. And so we hope that these events, also including obviously the support and the interest of everyone in this room, that we actually really are able to make a change, make a difference. We want to make sure that then really the water sector actors talk to nutrition and health, and so I mean this is a great start, and we hope that the Africa Union Commission continues to pursue that. We now have a few short interventions, 3 to 4 minutes, from esteemed panelists, and we start with His Excellency Professor Dr. Seleshi Bekele. He's the ambassador of Ethiopia to the United States and the former Minister of Water, Irrigation and Energy of Ethiopia. From that point of view, always thinking, I think, cross-sectorally. He's also the former director of IMI Ethiopia, had many other roles. He has worked in the United Nations, I believe, on SDG 6. So yeah, I think he can really, hopefully share a few short examples on joint water and nutrition interventions from Ethiopia. Over to you, His Excellency, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Everybody knows water is essential for life, but also to produce food and nutrition. I don't want to, because of time, I don't want to go through those kind of issues. I'll go directly to my examples. In recent years, Ethiopia embarked on exemplary food and nutrition or food production system. I would like to provide you 4 examples. Number 1, Ethiopia started to enhance rainwater management through water harvesting, catchment management, groundwater recharge, with resulting enhanced rain-fed crop and livestock production and productivity. This also helped small-scale irrigation at household level, so you take water harvesting at backyard, very important to produce nutritious food like vegetables. In this effort of rainwater management, 12 million persons per year for 30-day labor contributed to rehabilitate degraded areas. Second example is irrigated and summer wheat production that dramatically increased the food production, productivity of water, land, and labor. Smallholder farmers' land cultivated under land consolidation farming to suit for mechanization and improved input supplies. Irrigation, particularly rehabilitating equipped land for irrigation, increased water access from groundwater, pumping and diverting surface water have substantially increased water production for dry season production. And of course, utilizing to some extent in some places drought-tolerant seeds. As a consequence, the production increased. In the first year of experimental year, 5,000 ton additional wheat. The second year, 1.1 million metric ton, and on the third year, in 2022, 2.5 million metric ton. Now we are expecting in 2023 4 million metric ton wheat. This is in addition to the 5 million ton rainfed production system. So the year 2022 already substituted most of our import needs, which stands at 1.7 million ton, which from poor economy we are spending over $1 billion. But now this is reversed, and we are in the tendency of exporting. The third example is the Ethiopia's unique example is, we call it Green Legacy Initiative, which is an initiative of the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, started 4 years ago. So far, we have planted 25 billion seedlings with about 80% survival rate. In the 4 years, we achieved that. The plantation show results of improved water availability in the catchment, definitely, to increase infiltration and the like. Improved adaptation to climate change is also a very important dimension of this benefit. Control of desertification and obvious carbon sequestration. The Green Legacy Initiative, most importantly, increased the food and nutrition production from agroforestry component of the initiative and in the form of producing fruit, fodder for animal, household income through plantation of coffee and export fruits into global market even. The fourth example is in the effort of nutrition intervention. Ethiopia embarked just this year what we call the program called Plate for Generation, which is focusing more on animal-based production, including milk production and acute, to compensate the acute shortage and huge demand in milk supply, meat production, eggs, chicken, and various other animal production. This, how important it is for nutrition, especially if you just take eggs as an example for children under 5 years. If you feed them, stunting could be avoided, and so many benefits can be achieved. In all these transformative results, the unique addition in the development and management of water, improved seed and breed, fertilizer, and mechanization technologies. Management of water that makes water availability, protects against climate variability or change, effects in the form of drought are key interventions for success. Of course, challenges remain still from multi-year drought, like what currently has happened in Borana and Somali region of south and southeastern Ethiopia, where about 3 million cattle perished and livelihood eroded. These are remaining significant challenge in Ethiopia because of intensifying effect of climate change. Also, lack of capital for increasing access to agriculture and economic water, competing use of water including transboundary dimension, lack of access to electricity, essential for food processing and preserving, and other infrastructure like roads and market linkages are critical constraints and challenge. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much again, His Excellency. And Ethiopia has had the by far fastest agricultural productivity growth in all of Eastern Africa and probably across Africa, because they've actually truly invested in climate resilience and food security with all of these activities that the ambassador mentioned. So it's definitely a country in terms of ag investments for others to follow. Now we hear from Professor Sarah Young. She's with Northwestern University and a co-author of the UN Nutrition Report on Harmonizing the Water and Nutrition Decades. And I think she'll talk to us a bit about some of the tools that we can use to jointly advance water security and nutrition. Please, Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Claudia. Good morning, everyone. And it's really an honor to be with these esteemed experts in water and nutrition, and it's a pleasure to talk to you today. So in the 2018 high-level panel report on water, there's a quote that says, we can't manage what we can't measure, and that's especially true for water. And I would argue that the human face of water has been missing from what we've been measuring with water. And I saw that very clearly during some ethnography I was doing in Kenya. And so right along Lake Victoria, I was talking with women. They were talking about how they were getting beaten up if there wasn't water in the house, how they couldn't exclusively breastfeed because all of these very far-reaching consequences of water insecurity. So I looked at the available tools, and I saw we're pretty good at measuring physical water availability. We also are pretty good at measuring infrastructure. But what we're missing is this sort of the human experience of access, use, and reliability. And that's a big gap. I mean, it doesn't matter if a borehole is there or not if it's not getting the water for productive and household uses. So what we did is, through a long, boring, tedious statistics and theory and lots of field work, we developed the household water insecurity experiences scales. This was with a collaboration of 30 other scholars. And then we went from there to develop the individual water insecurity experiences scales. And those have since been implemented in probably 50 or more countries by probably 100 organizations in many, many languages. And it's told us a lot. And one of the things that I want to drive home here is someone said water speaks to water, and that's true. But what I hope we can do with this scale is bridge to other sectors. So these scales have been useful for understanding just water insecurity in and of itself and where the problems are. And because we're measuring at the individual level, we can see disparities by gender or religion or ethnicity or urbanicity or income. And we can see these, and we now have nationally representative data for around 40 countries, including some of the countries represented here. I'd be happy to share those with you. So we can use these data to understand where the problem is, but we can also use these data to understand the impacts of interventions. And there are a number of NGOs who have successfully used this to see the prevalence of water insecurity was X percent and it's dropped by 20%. And it's impressive. It's better than, for example, borehole counting. So we've also seen that these data can be used to advocate for resources. So when you know that the national average is X percent, but you know that in this community it's 20 times that, that's very powerful. I mean, my ethnography is interesting, but nothing speaks to policymakers like numbers. And so we can present these very hard numbers, and we can say this percent of people are angry about their water situation, this percent of people have to change what they're eating because of problems with water. It's really compelling. So just as a final example of how these sort of data can work, what we did is we measured food insecurity, so using the SDG, so Food Insecurity Experiences Scale, as implemented by FAO, was implemented in the same 45,000 households as the individual water insecurity experiences scale. And it was just published last month in the bulletin of the WHO. So we can see that if you are water insecure, you're 2 to 3 times as likely to be moderately or to severely food insecure. So I will leave you with, by imploring you to please consider quantifying the human experiences with water for the sake of water insecurity, but also because we can now tie these experiences of water insecurity to food, to nutrition, to mental health, and to physical health. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's important that we have more and more of these tools to do a better job on water, being able to talk to nutrition, and also nutrition to be able to talk to water. We now hear from Dr. Matthew McCartney. He's with the International Water Management Institute, and he's the lead of the NEXUS Gains Initiative, and also co-author of the UN Nutrition Report on harmonizing the water nutrition decades. I don't know if the two co-authors ever met before. And he'll talk to us a bit about how can better freshwater fisheries management support both the water and nutrition decade. Matthew, over to you.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit about fisheries, and we've already heard from Virginia about how important animal source foods are, and specifically fisheries within nutrition. Last week there was a report produced by FAO and World Fish and I think Duke University called Eliminating Hidden Harvests, which is a very interesting global review of small-scale fisheries, which found that something like 500 million people worldwide that have their livelihoods at least partially dependent on small-scale fisheries. Of course, that's both coastal and inland waters, but still a high proportion is still from the inland waters. Something like 12 million tons of fish, small-scale fisheries are produced from inland waters with a value of about $19 billion. So it's not niche, it's a very big component of food for very many millions of people. And fish, of course, are important because they're very rich in micronutrients as well as protein, but things like zinc, iron, calcium, omega-3 fatty acids, and vitamin A, all produced highly particularly in small fish. And millions of people worldwide get their protein and their vitamins from these small fish, and it's very important for the first 1,000 days of life as well. Incredibly important. So fisheries are very important for nutrition. But the management of water typically neglects fisheries when we manage water. It's often overlooked. We heard from Inga about the importance of infrastructure and how in Southern Africa they're promoting infrastructure for water storage, irrigation, etc. But very often when those types of investments are made, fisheries are ignored. And we're arguing that and that has implications for, on fish migration, dams, block migration routes, both the fish swimming upstream, but also the eggs moving back and fry moving back downstream. Irrigation systems often block fisheries access to floodplains and habitats on floodplains. Water abstraction alters flow regimes and changes adversely habitat for fish. So we argue that you need to integrate fisheries much more into water management. It can be done through things like environmental flows within irrigation systems. You can manage your irrigation system not just for the crops that you're trying to grow, but also for fish within the irrigation systems, etc. Fish ladders are often a way of connecting irrigation systems to natural habitats and so on. So that integration, again, which a lot of people have talked about, we would say is very important, and that fisheries can be central and as an entry point into this integrated management of both water and nutrient-rich food. It's basically essential. So this integration is the way that we would argue that you can bring together fisheries as an entry point for food security and nutrition and water. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think excellent point, and it's true we tend to forget fish, they're under the water. And we now hear from, I guess, eminent fisheries expert, Dr. Shakundala Tilstead, the winner of last year's World Food Prize, I believe, for her work on fisheries. She is now the CGIAR Systems Office Nutrition Impact Platform Coordinator, and she actually will not talk about fisheries, I think, but instead about the essential role of water for drinking and preparing diverse and nutritious food. So again, water in food preparation, water in food processing is an area that's generally forgotten about. So please, over to you, Dr. Tilstead.
Thank you, Claudia. And it's really nice to hear from the other speakers, and I really do hope that much of this gets into the follow-up of the UN Food Systems Summit 2021, and there are ways FAO is leading the follow-up of the UN Food Systems Summit together with other UN Rome-based organizations. So there's a lot here that can take us forward. What I'd like to talk about specifically is about water in food-based dietary guidelines. And most nations have food-based dietary guidelines. It's called food. But if you look at the dietary guidelines for our countries, as Sarah knows, the first recommendation would be on drinking water. And that's extremely important as the major component of diets. Not the waters in the foods and the waters used to prepare the foods, but water as one of the major components of food-based dietary guidelines. And this is extremely important, especially if you take into consideration the issues we have today with children and with respect to the increasing intakes of sugary drinks. Then with a focus on water as part of dietary guidelines, we will be able to have a means of displacing sugary drinks from the diets of young children and thereby making diets much more healthy. So we can assist governments. All governments would like to, but in bigger countries like India, there are state dietary guidelines, but it would be really good to assist governments with the policies and the investments and the scientific evidence for making sure that food-based dietary guidelines, we have to change the name from just call it dietary guidelines to change the dietary guidelines so that they become more sustainable and they become more nutritious. And part of this is water for drinking and water for preparing nutritious foods. The displacement is just not the sugary. I talked about the sugary drinks in children because that's really important for building up good eating habits and dietary habits. And therefore, if we would also have the food-based dietary guidelines, we will be able to use them, for example, in school feeding programs, and thereby children will be able to develop good eating habits, good drinking habits that can last them a lifetime and which they can pass on generationally. So many governments use these dietary guidelines for advocacy and communications, and this will be really good if we can also assist governments in doing this, because then we can use it. There are countries that have advocacy and communication material that go out to the general public every month, promoting good dietary habits, but also including traditional nutritious foods. So that's another entry point that we can use for having more nutritious foods and making sure that foods belong to the culture and the tradition of the population groups that we are working with. So I would like to recommend that when we look at also the right to food, that we make sure we include the right to food together with the right to water, and look closely at having those two together, using the principles of leaving no one behind and assisting governments, national governments, to ensure that their dietary guidelines also have a greater focus on water. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dr. Tilstead, she's also an author, I think, of the Eat Lancet Planetary Diet Try To effort that tries to focus a bit more on authors and people in low income countries, which I think is a laudable effort to increase that focus. And we now hear from our last speaker, Dr. Shiney Varghese. She's with the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy and a co-author of the 2015 HLPE report, and she's also a member of the 4th Steering Committee of the UN High-Level Panel of Experts on Food Security and Nutrition. and she'll give a few remarks on yet another aspect of how water and nutrition are intersected or should be better intersectional, and that is agroecological transition as an entry point. So please, Shiney, over to you.
Thank you.
And I do have the little video there, so you have to, and I'm not sure if it'll work, but you
let's
tell
see.
me.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm really delighted to be here today, not just because of the topic, but also this is the first time we are in the same physical space after a long time. So this session actually comes on the heels of a 3-hour plenary IATP out of my organization organized earlier this month in Doha at the Civil Society Forum of the LDC 5 conference. And so we had organized this session with our partners. So I should actually say that IATP is a research and advocacy organization. We do our research and work with partners in developing countries to advocate for solutions that work for them. And so we were in Doha organizing a session with a number of national and international civil society networks focused on LDCs. And our theme was agroecological transitions towards food sovereignty. Why do I focus on LDCs here now? The LDCs account for 14% of the total global population. And yet they are home to more than half of the world's extremely poor. That means those people are living under less than $1.90 a day. Some of you might know that one of the 3 criteria used for determining the LDC status is what is known as Human Asset Index, which is measured in terms of nutrition, and the other 2 indicators are health and school enrollment. Of the 1.1 billion people living in LDCs in 2020, an estimated 244 million people were undernourished. 665 million people did not have access to safe drinking water. Of course, there are other things like access to electricity, access to cooking fuel, etc. But these are not simply numbers. These are people lacking in drinking water, children who are not having access to food to eat, and the Doha Program of Action for LDCs for the next decade recognizes that progress is not happening at the pace required. Clearly, if we do not collectively address poverty that plagues LDCs and build on their strengths, the action plans for the decades of nutrition, on water action, all of them will fail. But the stories told around LDC conference are overwhelmingly one of lack. As an example, the dominant story about hunger is that food security is caused by lack of food supply. That in turn, that is blamed on lack of technology, lack of energy, and other inputs like lack of fertilizer, as well as low productivity and poor roads and lack of infrastructures. Such a story ignores both the historical causes of LDC's situation and the current global economic structural causes that keep them there. There is some truth to many aspects of that story of lack, as with any story that is persuasive. But the overall effect is to mislead. It presents LDCs as having limited choices and proposes a solution that depends on external inputs, ignoring the knowledge and diversity of resources they have at their hand. The dominant story proposes a model of agriculture that extracts wealth away from farms and rural communities. And this is a story that has played in North America, where we are based. Our organizations were in Doha to tell a different story, a story of hope and possibilities, centered on investing in what LDCs already have, and indeed rural communities everywhere have, on valuing that wealth and protecting it, and building on their contextual and complex knowledge of their land, their resources. It recognizes the fact that smallholder food systems already feed billions of people around the world today, including those living in the LDCs. The stories my colleagues from Haiti and Bangladesh shared were that of better economic viability and better nutrition. The stories from Togo and Uganda were of how the communities managed to weather the food security challenges even during the pandemic. So our call is to build on smallholder farmers' strengths as a pathway to food and nutrition security, to build synergies between the realization of right to food and right to water. And that is the story of agroecological transitions towards food sovereignty as well as food and nutrition security. Investments in food systems should not aim to minimize labor and maximize profit at the cost of social and ecological resilience. Instead, the focus of public investments in food systems need to be to produce, process, and consume a diverse range of foods in ways that nurture land, soil, water. And that should be building on the diverse local food cultures that is already, which Africa is known for. So if I wanted to end with a 2-minute video if possible, this is a call from Claire, our colleague from Togo, if possible, but if there is time.
Exactly, we'll do it right after some audience interactions, because we have a lot of people in the room. If there's no questions, we'll show the video. And even if, at the end we will still show the video.
Okay,
but I first wanted to now, after you have heard so much from including on the agroecological transitions that are needed as part of growing resilience and increased water security and nutrition. To really hand this now over to you. You've heard a lot of things, maybe too much. And so the question now is, what do you think we need to do differently? There's a lot of call on joining the human right to water and the human right to food. Obviously, that's not only a complex legal construct, it's just that's a very complex process, so very long term, but there are a lot of efforts going on, and Professor Mehta is right in there. We talked a lot about investments. I think we also need to hear more success stories that are out there. There are a lot of local success stories on more nutrition-sensitive irrigation. We have success stories where we have much more resilient populations that have access to water for domestic and productive uses if the right investments have been made and if women and local populations have been consulted. So, what do you think from your experience? Where else should we be focusing on? Obviously, I think we are all in the room because we believe that water is essential for the food system transformation, for improved nutrition outcomes. We know that the wash sector tends to, similar to water talks to water, wash talks to wash. I think we need more interaction between domestic and productive water uses. But where else do you would like to make some intervention? If you could please always introduce yourself. If you want to have a question to a specific panelist and speaker, let us know. We'll start with Safa Fanayan and then we move over, I think, to Sarah. But please, Safa.
Hi, I'm Safa Fanayan, and I'm working at the Australian National University, but previously I was working on water quality networks in India. And one of the things that we found that supplementing water quality in a lot of parts of India, there's fluoride contamination, there's arsenic contamination, and nutrition actually plays a very strong role in helping curb the deficit, the malnutrition that comes out of fluoride, because it basically leaches calcium out of the body. And they found that supplementing, especially there's a lot of local food that can supplement and try to offset the impacts of these water quality challenges. So there's a very strong linkage, and that focus, I'm sure you guys have it in there, but I feel like that's something that needs more attention, because there's also so many, with fisheries also, water pollution is creating such a challenge in feeding back into food systems as well, which comes back to nutrition and creates problems of human health. So that's water quality issue and food.
Yep. An excellent example of a nutrition intervention that can help address water pollution. And obviously fluoride contamination is a big issue in many countries, Tanzania, elsewhere. So I think some cross-country learning from this Indian case study would be excellent. And hand over to the next speaker. Do you just walk over to one? Yeah.
Yes, hello, Sarah Dicken from the Stockholm Environment Institute. So I just wanted to first thank all the panelists for their interventions. I think it's very inspiring, coming also more from the WASH sector, to hear about these important issues like water for food and cooking, for example, that's really overlooked in the WASH sector. But I then also wanted to point out the side of sanitation, environmental enteropathy, and then wastewater as well. wastewater is used for irrigation in many countries and enters the food system, presenting a number of different risks, but also the other side of food security. And then also to ask more about the gender aspect. So there's work looking at empowerment in the wash sector and water that I'm involved in, but also in agriculture. So to understand more about how to link this effort to in terms of women's empowerment, decision making in these issues, how we can integrate these two agendas. Thank you.
Yeah. No, excellent point. I think we didn't spend enough time on gender and marginalized populations, indigenous people. So very clearly, we know that for nutrition, women are key. We heard this morning, just many statistics on how many millions of hours women spend, especially in Africa, on collecting water. So if you can make the right investments, bringing women in, empowering them both on the wash side and actually on the agriculture, food, nutrition side overall, we know that generally we will get better outcomes, but we have to be super careful because the women are very overloaded. Any action we propose, such that avoids, helps them to not have to collect drinking water, for example, are essential and actually are very empowering. So that's a great point. Another intervention, okay. So we have intervention here, 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 and here. And then we'll have to look at the time. Please. And also introduce, on the left, please also introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Robert Slaughter, and of course we're all aware of the problems that exist in the world, especially when it comes to water. It's a huge, huge problem. But I have been working with colleagues of mine to figure out what we can do that would be a solution for the problems that we hear about all the time. And so we have been working and struggling for a number of years to develop new sustainable water technology. And we had to scrape the surface of the earth for every penny to keep us moving forward with this project. And we just did our prototype and started it up. It worked. And this prototype is the beginning of a pump that's going to revolutionize the movement of water worldwide, because it does a number of things. It uses 50% less energy than your standard pump does. People don't know this, but to get the water to come out of your shower or in your kitchen or whatever, it uses about 15% of the world's energy to make that happen. We will cut that in half. Also, too, the pump cleans the water as it's going through. In Africa alone, we could eliminate 50% of the disease, I'm sure, if people could just drink clean water, period. Plus, with changes to this, we could have huge impact on desalinization, because desalinization plants use up enormous amounts of energy. We could cut that in half. That's all I have to say.
Okay.
Anyone interested, please come up and talk.
Okay, so there's no, I guess talk to, the gentleman. Because otherwise if you would have a website or something, we could have mentioned that, but that's okay. Okay, next intervention, please.
Hello, my name is Anna Mary. I work for an international NGO called Brook. We work with rural communities in Africa, Asia, Latin America. And what we find in our work that communities and households who own a donkey are both more water secure and more food secure. So, for example, donkeys can carry water, can help women carry water across large distances, and this water is used for crops, so growing nutritious foods, which is then transported by donkey to the markets. And yet, this contribution isn't captured anywhere, so it's not measured, it's not covered in policy, it's not covered in programming. Communities do their best, but they have no support in terms of how to care for their animals, how to pay for veterinary care. So, Madam Chair, you asked about gaps and you asked about what more you can do. So I wonder what the panelists think about in terms of addressing gaps as that, and perhaps one solution would be more cross-sectoral collaboration, including the, perhaps the less obvious stakeholders like the animal welfare sector, animal health sector, but yeah, I'm just really interested in people, if people see more gaps like that and how we can work together to address this.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great intervention, and definitely Donkeys are the water carriers, if anyone can afford it, after women and children as carriers. So that is the next stage up. And we probably, I mean, everyone working in Africa has probably seen donkeys in action to provide domestic drinking water. Great point. There was intervention from here, please.
Hi everyone, so I'm Arti from Hevos, but I would like to highlight that I'm together here with Bu Evi. Evi is one of the women federations living in slums area in densely populated North Jakarta, and it's based on her experience. So we thought that many people living in slums area need to pay double or even triple because they are illegals and government piping system couldn't access, then it will influence also their money that could be allocated to buy adequate food, and this make them buy an instant food for examples. And yeah, we would like to highlight how the investments that the panelists say to harmonizing water and nutrition intervention also could benefit the people living in illegal areas, in slums area. And also one of the local solutions that they already have in a woman there, they have kind of a saving mechanisms, and they usually use this system to buy water when the price is very high, and also to help them coping with the food shortage. So what kind of a program also could leverage the already existing social capital or community system that already happened there? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think and that's an excellent contribution, and that is always a challenge if you live in an illegal settlement. It's very difficult. I mean, it's anyway difficult to get public access or public support, but if you live in an illegal settlement, even more so. And that's exactly when community managed and community owned financial support services are pretty much the only way to make a difference there. And obviously the governments know who lives where, more or less, if they don't know exactly how many, but and I think this intervention, this solution sounds like the best and possibly the only way, because I know they will not want to establish permanent water support services, because the whole idea is this remains illegal, they can't do it. So I think that sounds great. And in general, we know that when we have community managed financial services, saving banks, etc., there's many of these community systems that they have dramatically contributed to, especially to get over crisis, such as you mentioned, fluctuating high water prices. So that's excellent. We have an intervention from the back. From you. Okay.
Yeah, I actually have a question, not a statement. Is that
okay?
all right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah,
My name is Vajesh, and I represent NIVIA, New York Water Environment Association. So actually, to Ms. Young, you talked about the study that you did. Have you considered the effectiveness of water management as a criteria, like how effectively they are managing the water, even if it's scarce and it's not abundant? If yes, how did you do that?
Thanks for that question. So the WISE scales are 3 minutes long, 12 items, and what I would recommend is if that's a question of interest, that you measure water insecurity along with governance. And that's been done in places, and it's been shown that improving governance improves water insecurity, and we can talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Governance is, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, is key to everything. And including, to getting access to water, food, and nutrition. So I think we have time for 3 or 4 more quick questions. Okay, we have one here. Anyone else? Any last burning? Okay, 2, 3. This is the active side. This is the less, which is perfectly fine, as we can only take 3. So we start, please, Johannes, and introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Yeah. My name is Johannes Gebersadik. I'm from CGIAR IFPRI. I would also like to join everyone who's thanking the panelists and the key note speakers on their remark. I am pro learning from what worked best, or from success stories. So my question goes directly to His Excellency Ambassador Slashy. I really find those 4 examples very fascinating. They've done a lot in terms of both transforming improving the livelihood of the people and transforming the food system from being an imported to an exported in short amount of time. So I think we need to grill that more. My first question is, what's next for this intervention, or what's the government planning in terms of designing other similar projects to get the same kind of result? The second one is what's again the plan in terms of aligning these efforts or prioritizing these efforts together with these large-scale development plans that the country is currently engaging in, particularly these medium to large-scale dams and reservoirs and irrigation schemes. Thank you very much.
Okay, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Johannes, for the questions. The next actions regarding expanding irrigation, to do irrigation accessible to all people who are occupied in farming practices. It's really brings a lot of dynamism in the agricultural sector. On one hand, productivity issues, where rainy period is about 3 months only in Ethiopia, and the rest for this labor, it is just becoming idle because there is no production and things like that. Therefore, if we manage water through good infrastructure to supply water during dry season, it's possible to increase labor productivity, obviously land productivity, and again, the water productivity issue also comes into context. Irrigation development, especially at household level, is so important actually when you look at nutrition. It can provide essential vitamins, nutritions, because women just plant some in their backyard and then put it in the food system. That means it's so essential and important. So expanding the practice nationwide is very, very useful. The other dimension I didn't talk towards our challenge, especially related to climate change-induced intensified drought issue, is very crucial to consider and do something about it. We started the initiative called Climate Resilient Wash. Climate Resilient Wash means, in particular in dry areas, in desert-like areas, water is limited where you could find. Then, in order to access that water, usually either people travel with their livestock. Normally, the production system is livestock-based, and spend a lot of energy. Animals spend a lot of energy, time, and so on. So when multiple-year drought comes, actually it completely wipes out the livestock and, of course, all belongings. So for that, at least to secure the drinking water component and some level of fodder production through irrigation is possible, but we have to rethink differently. That rethinking is, instead of traveling those long distance, actually put a pipe system from reliable water resource going deep into groundwater, which it has to be also renewable, of course, but then convey water in, where it is needed, not go to the water where it is available, because it has a lot of burden. For example, in Somali region, that burden is people go with their livestock to water point, even crossing border from Somalia, and then that water point becomes so congested and contaminated. Then the issue becomes from water insecurity and water scarcity to the burden of health. And this becomes more complicated, and therefore we have to intervene, invest, so that
stock and drinking water for domestic use. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, I think very good point. Even when we work in Ethiopia, Ghana, and elsewhere on small-scale irrigation, we actually know that the same water is used for livestock watering. In some cases, women only want the water for livestock because they don't have the right to water crops. And of course, also the same water is used for domestic uses, and that's why we need this tethered mechanisms to make sure that the water doesn't get polluted, because livestock also uses it, for example. So yeah, I agree. That's why we really have, the sectors really have to work together. With that, we are almost at a close. I think just to quickly summarize, I think a clear call to join the human right to water, together with the human right to food. More work has to be done, but we need to push this call upwards. We've heard about some great interventions that bring these sectors together, such as the nutrition intervention to address water pollution like fluoride, contamination. We talked about community financial services and institutions to really help communities, become more resilient in the face of both water and food shortages and poor nutrition. We talked about food-based dietary guidelines that need to be more water and environmentally relevant. We talked about some innovations such as modern pumps, without the intervention of individualized diesel pumps in the 1970s in Japan, and then followed by India and China. Now you can find them everywhere. We would not see the kind of food production levels and also to some extent improved domestic water security that we see as a result. It's still very limited and still only for people who can afford those pumps, but we certainly have moved ahead, and now with solar pumps we're moving further ahead. We said we need to shine a light on dark corners in our linkages, and that includes we mentioned the donkeys used for as water carrier. We talked about water for food processing, water for food preparation, better understanding individual experiences of water insecurity. We also talked about climate resilient wash interventions, great examples from Ethiopia on how to through irrigation, improve food security and nutrition outcomes. And I think with that, I'd like to leave all of you and thank everyone again for participating. And I'm playing that video now for people who would still like to see it. We officially have to kind of leave the room in 1 minute because the next group has to come in. So thanks to everyone.